Hi, my name is Ashley. I'm from Imagine If Libraries, and this is a Teen Eats cooking tutorial, which is a part of a video series where I give some sort of teen media recommendation and then I cook something inspired by that recommendation. Today, we are going to talk about required reading and a little bit about TikTok trends. We're talking required reading today, and I thought that we would make afternoon tea because I know for a lot of high schoolers that 19th century British Lit is required reading. So I thought that we would make a sponge cake, shortbread, and tea sandwiches for our tea. And I think I've said this in other videos, but the first step to baking is to read through your instructions and pull out all the ingredients before you even start. Maybe even read your instructions a couple times. So for these instructions for our sponge cake, we are going to need 2 8-inch round cake pans and a flour sifter along with all the ingredients. So I'm going to pull out all those ingredients and find my flour sifter to get started. The sponge cake we are going to make today for our afternoon tea is going to be the sugar and spice sponge cake from this Pride and Prejudice Martha Stewart cookbook I have. But sponge cake relies on the leavener baking powder, which wasn't invented until 1843. So technically, this sponge cake could not have been eaten in Jane Austen's time, but it looks delicious nonetheless, and sponge cake is frequently featured in afternoon tea. So this recipe calls for us to sift together 2 different types of flour and then to cream together our wet ingredients. So that is what we are going to do next. I have pulled out all of our ingredients. We are ready for the first step of our sponge cake. The first step of our sponge cake will be to sift together all of our dry ingredients, our flours, and our spices. The second step of our sponge cake will be to beat together or to cream all of our wet ingredients in this bowl. But let's get all of our flours and spices sifted into the smaller bowl. So we need 1.5 cups each of all-purpose flour and cake flour. All-purpose flour is more dense than cake flour, but we want this cake to be nice and light, so we're using both. I also have this butter knife to level off my flours here because we want to be really precise with our baking. And then I'm just sifting it together to create more air into our cake batter. I'm going to repeat this with all of our dry ingredients. Now we are going to cream our room temperature butter and our plain sugar together. I know that they are totally creamed together when they have changed slightly in color. So now it's a rich yellow and white. It should be very light yellow when I'm done creaming the ingredients. My hand mixer here no longer works, so I'm going to take these eggs, some milk, the vanilla into my standing mixer and finish the batter. Our batter poured between these 2 baking tins that were prepared with vegetable spray. I'm going to bake the cakes at 350 for about 30 minutes. These tins are actually 8.5 inches wide, so hopefully our batter isn't spread too thin. Next thing we are going to make while our cakes cool in the background are these chocolate shortbread fingers. So in the 1800s, when tea was becoming popular, there was usually some sort of chocolate element to the tea. We are going to make these fingers because not only are they chocolate, they're also a cookie or a biscuit, and there are usually biscuits at tea. So I am going to sift together flour and cocoa powder, and I don't have Dutch processed cocoa powder. It's a type of cocoa powder that's more acidic than regular cocoa powder. I couldn't find any, so I'm just going to use this regular cocoa powder, but I will need to add a little bit more baking soda to the baking powder because Dutch processed cocoa is more acidic than regular cocoa. I'm going to sift everything into this bowl, just like I did with the cake, and I'm going to cream together some sugar and some butter with my stand mixer. So I am pressing our shortbread mixture into its prepared baking dish. As you can see, the shortbread mixture is much different than our cake batter. The cake batter was pretty thin, loose in its pan, whereas this sticks to itself. The ingredients between the cake and the shortbread weren't like vastly different. They both required flour and sugar. Even the steps we took to make both of these were the same. We needed to sift flour and cream butter and sugar. But this cookie that I am spreading into the bottom of this tin is much more dense. It doesn't have any liquid like milk or other oil to make it thin. It also doesn't have as much leavening as the cake does. So I am just trying to evenly spread this onto the bottom of this dish. We are going to cut it into strips when it's out of the oven, but shortbread is really crumbly and buttery, and it tastes like that because you have to cool and rest your batter after you have formed it into its shape. So this is about ready to be set aside for a couple minutes. I've pressed it evenly into the bottom of this dish. I'm going to put it in my freezer for 15 minutes, and we will make the mascarpone frosting for our cake. We're on to the frosting for our sponge cake. So our sponge cake is going to have layers of frosting and jam. The frosting today has mascarpone cheese in it. Mascarpone cheese is an Italian dessert cheese. It's normally found in desserts like cannoli. It's sweet. It sort of has the texture of cream cheese, but it doesn't really taste like cream cheese. So I'm going to beat together this mascarpone cheese and powdered sugar until they are fully combined. I'm also going to whip this 2 cups of cold heavy whipping cream until it forms stiff peaks. And then I'm going to fold this mascarpone cheese and powdered sugar mixture into the stiff peaks of our heavy whipping cream to form the frosting. And then we are just going to compile our cake. Here is our whipped cream. This was a liquid. It was heavy whipping cream, and then we forced it into whipped cream by whipping those milk solids together that was in the whipping cream. It formed this fluffy texture. Now I'm going to just fold in our mascarpone cheese mixture to make the frosting. Let's assemble our cake. So as you can see, I wasn't very kind to the layers of sponge when I was pulling them out of their pans. They're a little broken. We're going to cover it up with jam and this frosting, and I think it'll be okay. You probably won't be able to tell once we're eating. I have a container of jam here that I am going to spread half on each layer as evenly as I can. And then we are going to put the frosting on top of the jam. Just a thin layer. And I just chose my favorite jam for this. It's this cherry jam, but I think any kind of jam would be good in a sponge cake. So the sponge cake became really popular with Queen Victoria after the invention of baking powder, which is why probably the most common form of sponge cake is called the Victoria sponge cake, which has a strawberry layer. This is really similar to that cake. We followed the exact same steps, we just flavored it a little differently. I think that's about even. I kind of wanted to brush up to the sides of this cake because I think it will look pretty that way. And you won't be able to tell that I accidentally broke the cake a little bit. Okay. Now I'm just delicately taking our broken piece here. Okay. And even though the pans were slightly too large for the recipe, these cake layers did come out very evenly, so. Okay, voila! Look at that. I used to decorate cakes professionally a long time ago, but I think that came out pretty good. Pretty good. It looks delicious. I'm going to put this in the fridge and then we will make the last element for our afternoon tea. The last thing we are making today are tea sandwiches, and we are going to make my favorite lemon, dill, cucumber, cream cheese tea sandwiches. So for these sandwiches, you need white bread, untoasted white bread, cucumbers, lemon, dill, fresh dill, and softened cream cheese. And I am just going to sprinkle in some fresh dill into the cream cheese, zest and juice my lemon, and shave some cucumber, and then we are going to cut up the sandwiches in a decorative way. We are having a Victorian style afternoon tea today because I know that we are all familiar with 19th century British lit, and whether or not we like it, we should, or we can, get a treat out of it. I know that making something sweet is a really great reward personally for when I read something that is maybe not what I would normally read, or when I do anything that's out of my comfort zone. It's also really soothing to bake and cook like this. The first time I had these tea sandwiches, I'm not British, so the first time I had these, I made them for myself, and it was like an experimentation. And I wanted to try them because I was reading a lot of British literature for a course I was taking. And it really paid off because now I really, really like these sandwiches. So now that my cream cheese filling is all mixed up, using this vegetable peeler, I'm going to shave off some slices of cucumber. My peeler's a little dull, but it still looks nice. Just enough of this cucumber to fill up my sandwich. So sandwiches are an integral part of Victorian tea because before Victorian tea was popularized, British people didn't eat lunch. Like, they had a big gap between what was like their brunch and supper. So then they invented tea to have a light meal in the middle of the day. So I think everything is ready. I am going to spread a really light layer of this cream cheese onto my bread. Not too thick. It's okay if we don't perfectly get every corner because we are going to cut the corners off. And then I'm just going to layer my cucumber on top. These sandwiches are really light, but they are very delicious. They also make really good picnic food. I know normally these sandwiches are made with butter, but they are really good with this lemon cream cheese, as long as we don't spread the cream cheese too thick. And then we are going to slice up our sandwiches. I think one of the most fun parts of Victorian tea is how decorative and ceremonial the tea is. So tea looks a little bit different in England today in 2020, but we can still make an event out of our food. So I have cut all the crusts off of our sandwich, and now I'm just going to cut it into quarters. Even halves would be fine. They look quite cute, and we are going to just layer them up on little plates. It's time to tuck into our afternoon tea. So I don't have a white tablecloth, which is traditional in an afternoon tea setup, but I think our food looks both delicious and beautiful anyways. I also have green tea instead of black tea. Black tea is traditional for afternoon tea, but I think whether you are watching the 2005 Pride and Prejudice because you're on TikTok, or you have been assigned a 19th century British literature book to read, these are excellent treats to accompany both of those media. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see everyone next time. Bye!